Okay, I think we will make a start, very conscious that we've only got an hour or less than an hour now and lots to get through. So as I say, welcome all. Thank you so much for joining today. So I'm Stevie Jade Hardy and I'm the Head of Change for Policing and Youth Justice here at the Youth Endowment Fund. So I have the pleasure today to chair this virtual learning cafe. I'm sure that many of you who are joining this afternoon are somewhat familiar with hotspot policing. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time describing exactly what hotspot policing is. We're also joined by three incredible speakers who are probably much better placed to talk about hotspot policing than I am, so I will leave it to them. However, I did just want to say a few words about why the Youth Endowment Fund are particularly interested in hotspot policing. So, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the Youth Endowment Fund exists to prevent children and young people from becoming involved in violence. Over the last couple of years, we've been doing a huge amount of work to bring together the best available evidence on effective approaches to preventing violence. Hotspot policing is one of those effective interventions. So you'll see an overview on your screens. This is taken from our toolkit, where you'll be able to find out a huge amount of information about hotspot policing and how to implement it well. But as you can see here, we estimate that hotspot policing is likely to have a moderate impact on violent crime. And we're fairly confident about this assessment, as you can see from the three magnifying glasses, which speak to the quality of evidence that currently exists on hotspot policing. Now, despite this, of having that confidence around it having a moderate impact, we know that there's much more to be done around building the evidence base on hotspot policing. We also know that the impact of this approach in terms of how likely it is to be effective at preventing violence can be heavily influenced by the way in which it is delivered. So that's why we've organised this virtual learning cafe today. So we're bringing together three expert speakers who are going to share their insights about how to implement and evaluate hotspots policing. So each will present in turn, and then that will hopefully allow us some time at the end for some questions. So please do use the chat box throughout, share any comments, make any questions, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. If we don't manage to, we'll make sure that we get through them afterwards. All of the presentations you see today, as well as a recording of this session, will be hosted on our website. So, okay, without any further delay, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, which is Nick Morgan, who is the lead analyst for the GRIP programme at the Home Office.
Thanks, Stevie. I'll put my slides on the screen. If you could just, Stevie, let me know if those have come up all right.
They have, yes.
Fantastic. Okay, yes, so I'm Nick Morgan. I'm the lead analyst on the GRIP programme, which is the hotspot policing programme in the Home Office, or has been the hotspot policing programme up till March of this year. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the evaluation of that programme that we have done, which covers the year 21-22. I'll start with a very brief intro on what hotspot policing is and why it might be effective. I'm sure most of you know this already, but always good to brush up. It's based on the premise that crime clusters by place. There's been lots of great studies on this, particularly by Americans like David Weisberg, who has basically shown that when you look across a range of cities, he looked mainly at US cities and Tel Aviv in Israel, that about 50% of the crime occurs in around about 5% of the area. That's what the chart on the top right shows. And then basically the bottom table simply shows that more or less the same thing has been found to be true in England and Wales as well. So the premise of the basic idea behind hotspot policing is that if 50% of crime occurs in 5% of the places, then clearly we want to focus our resources in those places. And by sending police resources into those places, hopefully we can reduce crime. And as Stevie has already shown, the evidence base for that is pretty good. She put up the YEF page, I've put up the college page, but it's more or less the same story. Based on a meta-analysis, all the best studies, 65 studies in that meta-analysis, there's reasonably good evidence that hotspot policing works. So you might think, why do we need, another evaluation? We kind of know it works. Um, well, there is a tendency, I think, in government to think like that, a kind of the what works approach, where we just think of it like a menu, like a binary. Either something works or it doesn't, and we've got a kind of menu of stuff that works, and if we just pick something off the menu, everything will be fine. I don't necessarily think that's the way we should be going, or at least I think we can probably do even better than that. And I say that for a couple of categories of reasons. And this is why we wanted to run this evaluation, and why perhaps it's slightly different to some other types of evaluation. The first thing is that although there's good evidence that hotspot policing works, we didn't really know before the GRIP programme exactly how much of it was actually going on in England and Wales. It wasn't as if it was sort of measured anywhere. Are we doing more hotspot policing last year than this year? That kind of thing. Is it increasing or decreasing? So part of what we wanted to do was just to sort of try and measure that and get a feel for how much is going on. And linked to that is I put the link to the talk by Al Murray, who was at the Met. I think he's now at West Mercia. It's an excellent talk on the Society of Evidence-Based Policing website, where he talks about this sort of slight cultural barrier that can exist towards hotspot policing, basically because the police want to be, in his words, hunters, not sentinels. A great hotspot policing patrol is one that nothing happens, because you've hopefully deterred crime, which may not be the most exciting type of patrol. So there's this question about, even though the evidence is strong, how much is actually going on? So we wanted to get a feel for that. But then the second category of reasons was about, it's probably too simple to just say, does it work or not? What we really want to know is, does it work? How well is it being implemented? Maybe it isn't working as well in Leeds as in Birmingham, or maybe there are differences by local areas and differences by how well it's being implemented. So we wanted to check a bit more, a bit more thorough than just. It's probably the situation is probably not as simple as saying it always works or it always doesn't. And linked to that, I think, is probably the most important aspect of what we wanted to do, which was to create a kind of a feedback loop. Feedback being obviously a key motivator. And, the premise behind this really is it's all very well for an officer to know that there's 65 studies from Minneapolis and Chicago and so on that show this is supposed to work. But I think what would really motivate them would be to know that last month their activities pushed crime down by X%, whatever it was. So we wanted to create that regular feedback loop. That was a really important point. And linked to that is this idea of continuous improvement, rather than just a sort of one-shot game of yes, it works or it doesn't. We wanted to create this kind of continuous feedback loop. To try and explain this a bit further, I'm going to take a
Nick,
slight
sorry,
digression.
I'm really sorry. Would it be possible? We've just been asked by a couple in the comments box to go into full screen mode, please.
I can. It messes up because I've got a double screen thing going on.
Oh, okay.
Is it a big problem if I don't do that? Because I've had that before and it kind of messes up something on my thing. I'm happy to share these slides afterwards.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, where was I? So this is a story about POTS, not about hotspots, but about POTS. A ceramics teacher divides their class into two. There's Group A and Group B. This is from a book by David Bells and Ted Orland. And basically he tells Group A, all you've got to do is produce as many pots as you can. That's all you've got to do to be graded. You're just graded on how many you produce. And he tells Group B, you've only got to produce one pot, but it's got to be, and you'll be graded on the quality of that pot. And surprisingly, at the end of this experiment, what he finds is that all the highest quality pots are produced by Group A, even though they weren't even asked to produce good quality pots. They just naturally, by producing so many, got better and better and better and better at it. In other words, they made a pot, they got their feedback, saw what was good and what was bad, made another one, and on it went. Whereas Group B sort of sat around theorizing a lot about the best pot, only made one, made a load of mistakes, and it wasn't so good. And so that was the idea. That's what we wanted to create, really. This kind of let's do it, test it, see what works, what doesn't, test it again, do it again, test it again, keep going like that. You get the picture. So the aim for this is not so much what works, but what is working right now. And in London, is it different in London to Birmingham to Leeds and so on? And to do that repeatedly to get that continuous improvement idea. And also to be honest when it isn't working. And that's a really important point, obviously. We do need to have a tolerance for failure and to be honest about that. It isn't going to work even when it's been implemented really well. Sometimes it might not. So being robust about that is important. Also to understand these kind of implementation barriers and problems on the ground and to build this big feedback loop for the front line, but also for the chiefs to kind of deal with both the cultural and that kind of motivation issues. So background to the program itself, GRIP was launched off the back of rises in serious violence. Homicide, knife crime, gun crime increased in England and Wales from 2014-ish to 2018-ish. We had the serious violence strategy published in 2018. And that, off the back of that, there was funding made available for hotspot policing, initially in 18 police forces, increasing to 20. And that has now run from 21-22 through to 23-24. The evidence base we already talked about, strong. We also ran 2 trials as a lead up to the GRIP program, small scale trials, which is important, but robustly evaluated, and both had good effects, 30 to 40% reductions in crime in the hotspot areas. So it was set up well to do the GRIP program, which began in 21-22. How were we going to try and measure this thing, though? Big difference going from a pilot to a national rollout, but much bigger program, a bigger challenge. And it also, one thing we also wanted to think about when we tried to measure it was this bit at the bottom of the slide. I hope you can read that, which basically is that although there's a lot of evidence saying that hotspot policing kind of works, there's far less knowledge about exactly what the mechanism is. I think we sort of presume that a big part of the mechanism is, deterrence, basically, police going into a hotspot, offenders seeing the police and deciding not to offend, basically classic deterrence. But there's an awful lot around that we don't understand. Is it only when the police are totally visible, or does that deterrence last a bit after they've gone? If so, how long? What about if they arrest someone? What about if they're collecting intel? Does that play into this? So we wanted to try and devise a framework that could help us start to answer some of those questions, which are quite hard. The other thing we wanted to be is robust, as I've said. So for that, you do need control groups. And there are basically 2 types available for hotspot policing. The classic ones would be another set of areas. So you can imagine a force might have, say, 50 hotspots, divide them into 2 groups, preferably randomly, 25 that you patrol and 25 that you don't. And those are your control areas. Problem with that, from a Home Office point of view and also in forces, is that you leave 25 of your hottest areas unpatrolled, which is politically a very difficult thing to do. So we went down a different road, which was instead encourage forces to patrol all the hottest areas, but do it on different days. And again, many randomized that, which was fantastic. And then we could compare the days patrolled versus the days not. Now, you might be thinking, but hang on a minute, isn't there a bit of a problem with that? That, what if you patrol, say, 11 o'clock on a Saturday night? You're kind of hoping that that has some effect, deterrence lasting perhaps into Sunday morning, and maybe even longer, as we talked about this idea of kind of residual deterrent. So yes, that is an acknowledged kind of weakness of that approach, and the estimates may be underestimated for that reason. And hence we are trying also to build a kind of a control areas approach as well to sort of supplement it. And the whole package, we hope, will really hope to kind of answer those questions about how is this working, if it is so. Okay, so on to the main bit, the results. For 21-22, what did we see? Well, we had 120,000 patrols carried out, which is fantastic. 80,000 weapons taken off the streets as part of the patrols. The impact on crime, we got a significant 7% reduction in violence and robbery offences in the hotspot areas on days patrolled compared to days not patrolled. That was the pooled average effect across all the forces. And that was cost effective, £2.20 in benefits for every £1 spent. That was good. Not quite as big a results, not quite as big a percentage reduction as the pilots or the wider literature, and also not many statistically significant effects at the force level. I think the main reasons for that are probably one, this was big. This was a rollout. It's much easier to focus implementation when you've only got a small scale pilot. So you probably are going to get lesser results in a full scale rollout, but also statistical power, which brings us on to this, the kind of implementation issues that we think were probably involved and which we really want to examine as we move forward with the program. England and Wales is not Chicago and New York. We don't have as much crime. And so we run into this statistical power issue because much of the US evidence suggests short patrols, very small areas. But for us, is that the optimal size? Is it very small? Because we struggle in some cities to get, as much crime into that so that you might not see the impact if you haven't got as many offences. And therefore, if we're going to bigger areas, is 15 minutes, which has a strong US evidence base, is that the optimal patrol length? I think we're still working through those questions. How many officers and how often? Similarly, other challenges that we think affected things is about resourcing. I think we still need to know more about whether overtime models or dedicated teams are better. Resourcing of night shifts was also a big issue for obvious reasons. Turnover, huge, and not limiting that to the police. On the Home Office side, on the police side, everybody, turnover is a big issue. You can have a great team, and if you lose the wrong person, things can go backwards. And we did see a few examples of that. There were definitely variation in analytical capability across police forces and the level of buy-in. And the senior buy-in and sergeant buy-in, obviously incredibly important. But we feel like we've achieved a lot. We feel like we now have a regular, that kind of model in place that I was kind of talking about to feed back regularly. So we feed back on a quarterly or 6-monthly basis on how much patrolling is being delivered in each police force, whether it varies by hotspots, the compliance rate, what percentage of the time that they're meant to be patrolling are they actually, whether we're going to the right places, the exact micro locations within the hotspots, and the right times. And we're hoping to have individualized kind of crime impact by hotspot. At the moment, we're only at the force level. We're hoping to have that soon. And kudos to the forces who have really gone on this journey as well. And in a tech sense as well, we now are in a situation where the majority of forces have some sort of GPS tracking system to fully track their patrols and spit that data out very quickly and largely burden free, which is fantastic. And we have now an evaluation model that is fully coded and fully shareable with any police force or MPCC or college or YEF or whoever wants it to sort of get these results as well. Last slide. So what's next? Well, there's an awful lot still to do. We are putting together results for the subsequent years, 22, 23 and 23, 24, including that area comparison model that I mentioned, which will be really interesting. We're also looking at the effects on solving crimes, whether we see effects on things like arrests and charges. Displacement, something I haven't talked about largely because the evidence suggests there isn't much displacement. Crime doesn't tend to just move around the corner if you focus resources there, but we are going to test that in the program and hopefully those results should be out soon. We're also going to test problem solving, which has been another part of the GRIP funding package. And I think Rob is going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. So there's much more coming, much more feedback to give. And of course, finally, the programme has now been extended to all police forces. So we've got 43 rather than 20, and to antisocial behaviour as well. So we're going to be plenty busy over the next year or so. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. We'll hand straight over next to Nicola Musgrove, who is the Hotspots response lead at Northumbria Police. Thank you.
Thanks, Stevie. Yes, I'm Nicola Musgrove from Northumbria. I'll just get my PowerPoint up. I'm not here to speak as by any means as an expert. I'm a practitioner and I've just been asked to come and share my experiences. So, and just to sort of outline some of the challenges. Sorry, just bear with, I can't multitask now. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so I've been asked to come and share my experiences today because I've been with GRIP since its inception. I don't know whether it's something to be proud of, to be one of the original 18 forces to go on this hotspot policing journey, but I'm more than happy to share our experiences here today. So just a little bit about Northumbria Police. We're quite a large force, a real mix of both rural and urban areas, right from the borders with Scotland down to County Durham, and from the Pennines across and Cumbria across to the northeast coastline. So we've got about over 6,000 staff and 6 local authority areas. So we've just moved from 3 area commands to 6 area commands aligned with each of the of the local authorities. And Northumbria has some of the most deprived areas in the UK. So to talk about our sort of lessons learned over the last 3 years, it's quite challenging within the time that we've got today because there's been lots of learning. So I've grouped it into 4 areas I'd like to talk about. So the team setup, hotspot selection process, developing a patrol plan, and how we brief and task our staff who are carrying out the visible patrols. So if I talk about the team setup, first of all, we have a dedicated team, but not to carry out the visible patrols. That's sort of, if you like, your backroom staff. So I've been the project manager throughout. Initially, I was doing the operational delivery and all the strategic elements of it. That was really quite challenging, as well as I only work 3 days a week. I know some other forces have somebody, sort of a middle manager, inspector level, who actually do the operation delivery, and they report to somebody at a strategic level who maybe has had GRIP as one of areas of their portfolio, whereas I was just dedicated to GRIP. And in some ways that was really good, but I struggled, I think, to manage initially that demand between being there at that strategic level, really trying to win hearts and minds and the buy-in of chief officers and senior managers, and also delivering at an operational level that hotspot policing programme. Now I have a sergeant who drives the operation delivery of the programme, and that really works well. Some of my challenges were going back to what Guy said initially about police wanting to be hunters, not sentinels. I definitely had that mindset within Northumbria, and that's been a real challenge and involved a lot of hard work to try and turn that around. The other thing that's worked really well for us is having a dedicated briefing officer. She has been absolutely invaluable. I was able to handpick her, and it's worked out really well. I'll go into her role a little bit later. And the other thing is your analytical team. I think we under-invested in that initially. It's a data-led project, and also you want to evaluate the impact of what you're doing. And identifying the right skill set for that. We still haven't got it quite right, but I'm really quite excited about the developments within our analytical team this year. And I was assisting the VRU with some interviews yesterday for a public health analyst as well, and I think they'll be a real asset. And also taken up the option of training as well. So we just had 8 analysts within our force undertaking some training with Professor Spencer Cheney, and already the sort of light bulb moment last weekend around sort of that evaluation element that we've been struggling with. And finally, having an internal governance structure. So within Northumbria, this will depend entirely within your force, what type of structure you've got, who's doing your patrols, have you got a dedicated team who are doing the patrols, is it the responsibility of a certain department or your neighbourhoods, or are you relying on other department staff to drive this activity? So it's having that effective governance structure in place, depending on the setup within your force, to make sure that officers are going out there and delivering those patrols in the way that you want them to. The other thing is around hotspot selection. Guy referred to it before. Initially, we were quite tight in the crimes that we were including within our hotspot selection, and it was too small. We didn't have a large enough number in terms of volume to be able to measure any changes. So we extended it to include homicide, knife crime, the ADR 160, gun crime, CrimSec, and for those who don't know, their annual data returns that we have to provide data to the Home Office. We've included all robbery, all violence against the person. Initially, we just included your most serious violence. We've also included serious sexual offences and some public order offences, just because often the way our crimes are recorded, things like a free often contain offences where weapons are used. And again, you need to consider what you're going to exclude from your data set. So things we thought about, what hotspot policing is impacting on public space violence. So we excluded those offences that we weren't going to be able to impact upon. So that included DV, assault on police, and also possession of offensive weapons. That was a funny one, because we still want to count it, because actually it's a measure of our proactivity of having police officers in that hotspot area, trying to deter, prevent serious violence. So we do count that, but we don't include it in our data set. We keep that as a separate data set to measure our proactivity. We also excluded anything that happened within a private dwelling, prisons, police stations, and hospitals. And another anomaly that we didn't realise at first was care homes for the elderly can create a lot of serious violence, especially particularly homes where there's dementia. Because we had a particular example where there was a location in one of our areas up in Blythe, and it came up as a hotspot, and the neighbourhood inspector was just shaking his head and didn't understand it, and we established it was actually a care home for the elderly, making it hot. So as Guy said, each year we have a look at our approach and think, what worked well, what didn't, how can we improve it. So over time, we've tried to be a little bit more sophisticated in defining our hotspots. So initially, we used our force system. We measure, we can break down our crimes into footbeat areas. And so we were selecting those areas which the highest volume of crime within a footbeat area, and obviously looking at the crime severity score as well. But then when we met with the neighbourhood inspectors, they were saying, well, actually, yes, that is a sort of high harm area, but actually it extends into this area, and it was maybe into another footbeat area, but because overall that footbeat wasn't hot, it wasn't showing up as a high harm area. So what we did was we plotted all of the crimes that we're looking at, our serious violence crime set, within our mapping system and in a heat map, and we also added the severity scores. We use the Home Office severity score, and no other forces use the crime harm index, but our force uses the Home Office severity score, so we stuck with that, and we literally looked at the map. We applied that local knowledge. We had meetings, face-to-face meetings with the neighbourhood teams, and we actually physically draw following natural streets, so they're easy to walk around, and we developed to find our own hotspot areas from there, and we think that works really well. The hotspots, and we shared them with our neighbourhoods, our local authorities, and everybody was in agreement. We were targeting the right areas. We would even add that local intelligence to say, have we got everything in that hotspot that's really that you're aware of that's causing us issues in relation to serious violence? And it may be that we just had to extend it to include a premise at the end of the street or something like that, but we actually hand drew and created our own shape files for those. In terms of how much data you look at the time, the guidance was using 3 years of data, but we recognised, particularly since COVID, crime patterns had changed, and also we'd had experience of one particular area where 2 blocks of flats were making a particular area hot, but in the last 12 months that those flats have been decommissioned. So what we did was we checked that 3 years of data against the last 12 months of data, just to have a look to see if anything significant had changed. And then developing a patrol plan. Again, that's just, we did some analysis identifying the optimum times of day and days of the week to develop our plan. And this was, for us, it was 2 till midnight, and it was all days of the week, but particularly a Saturday. You've got to consider how many officers you need to patrol your hotspot areas. It depends how many hotspots you have, how close they are together. Do you want officers just from that area, or do you want a team of officers and to cover a cluster of hotspots over the time that you have? That again depends on the logistics and how your force is set up. And looking at the size, can you be visible across the whole hotspot area? In some occasions, if in doubt, walk it. That's what we did. And develop a plan that's sufficiently randomised. In an ideal world, I know what Guy's saying, it's great to be able to randomise your patrols in different areas. Policing will like a plan, will like a timetable that you can work off and plan ahead for the year. So we developed a plan that was sufficiently randomised with treatment and non-treatment days. And that's just a current example of ours. So for this year, so we have a 4-week rotation, and to cover that time period, we've got 2 till 8 p.m. shifts, and we've got 6 till midnight. Each hotspot is visited for 40 minutes, and they revisit it, so it's visited twice per shift, and all patrols are supervised by a dedicated sergeant. We did try just having the officers briefed and go out and patrol, but you've got to be really happy that the officers are doing what you want them to do when they're out there, that they are being visible and they are engaging with the public. So we've tried various different approaches, but that's where we've ended up. I'll rattle through because I'm conscious about the time. Briefing and tasking. We tried face-to-face briefings. We did a whole roadshow to look people in the whites of the eyes, tell them about hotspot policing. Again, trying to win hearts and minds. I can't say it made a massive difference. So we do them via an internet. We do forced briefings. So if you want to do the overtime, then you have to have undertaken the briefing, and we have relevant briefings for different groups and stakeholders. So whether it's your SLTs and your executive team, partners, neighbourhood teams, as well as operational briefings for each hotspot area. We always give them tasking as well. They're a valuable resource and want to make good use of them. So we want them to target particular areas and look for particular offenders when they're out there and gather intelligence to support the ongoing POP activity within those hotspot areas. So I'm conscious I've probably overrunning. So final thoughts. Eventually got the backing at exec level and SMT. It's been absolutely essential. We're getting there with our analytical team. You do need a blend of skills. Dedicated briefing officer, she's our vital link with the neighbourhood policing teams, regularly keeps the tasking up to date, and also ensures if we have last minute dropouts with overtime, she gets those filled. Supervising the patrols, essential. We use Good Sam as our tracking solution, and we find that really useful. It's essential to have close working relationships with our neighbourhoods who are doing the POP activity. I see the patrols as supporting their ongoing POP activity as well, and to give reward and recognition to officers that are doing the patrols. So that's very much a whistle stop of the last 3 years from our experience.
Thank you so much, Nicola. That was a great job at trying to condense 3 years worth of learning. So thank you. I'll hand over last but definitely not least to Rob Braddock, who is the Senior Research Officer at the College of Policing.
Hello, everybody. Just let me load my slides up. I'll try doing it this way this time. Okay, I'm hoping that everybody can see those.
We can.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Stevie. Yeah, I'm Rob Braddock and I'm a senior researcher at the college. And one of my responsibilities for the past few years really has been to support the GRIP Fund by sort of commissioning work from various providers to assist with upskilling staff in terms of their capacity to develop hotspots policing, and more recently to become effective problem solvers by using relevant analytical techniques and the relevant models. So yeah, I'm just really going to talk a little bit about what the GRIP journeys look like since 2021, because I think every year things have been tweaked, shall we say, or refined. So I don't think in any way, shape or form it's been a case of let's do the same thing next year than we did last year. We've always been quite keen to take sort of the previous year's learning with a view to kind of refining our approach for the subsequent year. So as Nick said, GRIP's been ongoing since 2021. I think we originally started with 18 forces, then it was 20 forces, and now obviously with the inclusion of antisocial behaviour within that particular sort of GRIP remit, we're now throwing the gates open, and everybody's going to have a glimpse of the wonderful world of grip. So again, just basically in terms of sheer numbers, things have changed every year, really. So obviously it's been important for us to kind of understand what people have had in terms of support in previous years, as well as ensuring that those that have had the sort of the full package of grip since the sort of the beginning of time have obviously also had additional support. So it's not just been a case of offering everybody the same thing, because people are at different stages of their sort of their development. Really, they've either been in grip since 2021, or they're more recent, or for some forces, or should I say the majority of forces now, everybody's kind of almost starting from scratch in terms of the support we're offering. So it's kind of a case of not really a case of a one size fits all approach. It's kind of a case of working out who's had what, and ensuring that everybody gets as much as we can possibly offer them, regardless of how long they've actually been involved with a grip fund for. So just basically chronologically, because that kind of makes sense for me anyway. In 21-22, the focus was purely on this, hotspots policing in terms of sort of saturated targeted patrol. What people see hotspots policing as traditionally being, you work out where your high crime areas are, you target your patrols to spend more time in the high crime areas than in other areas. So that was really what the main focus was in 21-22, and really the support we provided at that time. We commissioned the Cambridge Centre for Evidence-Based Policing to assist us with, and basically what they did is they worked with every single force, although it was only 18 at the time. And really, they had dedicated analysts as well as sort of process specialists in terms of those people that knew kind of how things worked in practice. And it was a case of actually working with each individual force to understand how to create hotspots, how big their hotspots would be. I know Nick touched upon this in terms of statistical power and kind of slight differences in terms of what the literature tells us in size, in terms of sizes of hotspots, and what's actually feasible in reality. Also did some work in terms of the briefings, trying to, I think it was found that really officers that actually understood the background of what they were trying to achieve in terms of, this is what hotspots is, this is what the outcomes could be. We're actually far more proactive in terms of their engagement and far more bought into the process than if they were just told, right, you need to go and stand in this place for this much time, without actually giving them any underlying rationale for why they were doing it. So we were working with them forces to actually kind of develop their briefings, and a really important thing really was tracking technology. And this is I think this is testament to the innovation of policing in this country, is the fact that we started with 18 forces, everybody was starting from scratch, everybody has developed according to what their needs are and kind of their geography, has developed some kind of tracking function that best suits their particular their particular area. If it's largely rural, for instance, some things work better than others. If it's largely urban, then some things don't work particularly well because buildings get in the way. So everybody has been quite innovative, and CCEBP actually helped us and helped forces to understand, how they could factor in all these various potential issues and come up with a solution that was actually beneficial to the force themselves. And I think also sort of related to that, but not exactly the same, was about kind of ensuring that forces understood how much resource was going into particular areas, and could actually measure that, because I think some forces actually struggled with this quite a bit at the beginning. And obviously it's really tricky to work out, if you haven't got an effect, is it because hotspots policing doesn't work, or is it the fact that actually you're putting no more resource into a particular area under your hotspots approach than these particular areas were getting anyway. So there isn't actually any difference. So it's really important to actually ensure that forces actually had the relevant know-how in terms of that. And that's actually a piece of work that we're continuing with to basically best support forces to understand how they can task their officers and how they, so that officers are doing what they should be doing, and also how to track them to make sure that that's actually happening. So really, really important initial work, really, to provide that level of support to forces at the beginning of their journey. And anecdotal feedback certainly suggests that forces kind of were certainly provided with some things to think about at that stage, and they've subsequently developed it since 21, 22. In addition to that, a guide for hotspots policing was also created to add to the literature on this. Obviously, a lot of the hotspots material that actually exists is of US in nature, and the whole point of the guide really was to provide sort of a UK slant and a practical application, and the kinds of, these are the things you need to be considering if you're going to do this. So really, actually, although there's, as I said, a huge amount of literature out there already, this is probably the first, if not one of the very few pieces of guidance that are actually purely kind of related to the UK in terms of how things work, rather than everything us kind of taking things from the US and assuming that things are going to be the same in this country, which they very rarely are. So then we moved on to year two, 22, 23, and this is when we started looking, not moving away from targeted saturated patrol, but just kind of thinking more about the types of activities that could take place in hotspots that had the potential to reduce serious violence. And obviously, again, we have a significant amount of literature that tells us that problem solving is a really, really sustainable way to address specific crime types within public spaces. Certainly some work, unfortunately, in the US carried out in Jacksonville suggests that actually problem solving, if carried out properly, can actually be more sustainable than targeted patrol, simply due to the fact that when you take targeted patrol away, there's always the potential that things are going to go back to the way they were, whereby obviously problem solving is more about actually adapting the environment in a sustainable way. So in 22, 23, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we could ensure that people that were involved in the GRIP Fund from an analytical perspective, as well as those who were tasked with kind of managing the whole process, how we could make sure that they were, they had all the tools that they needed in the toolbox. So 22, 23 was all about kind of developing some training, which we commissioned the University College London to do as subject matter experts, and also start to introduce the whole concept and the process of hotspots policing, not hotspots, problem solving, sorry, into the hotspots. So that's what we did in 22, 23, as well as developing towards the end of that financial year, starting to develop a serious violence problem solving guide for analysts. So what effectively analysts received in terms of face-to-face training in 23, 24, which I'll talk about shortly, everything that they got then, it will be included in this guide. So the guide's actually completed, but obviously we need to go through the various hurdles in terms of design and publication to make sure that obviously it's looking as nice as it can be. So watch this space. We're hoping to actually publish that certainly in the very near future. But as I said, basically it's just a documentary version of the face-to-face training that has been provided to GRIP forces in terms of the analytical support. So 23, 24 was all about actually delivering the serious violence problem solving learning program, which was delivered by UCL over the last financial year. And really that was all about getting what we were calling POP champions, those people that are responsible for problem solving activity within their hotspots, to work through and identify and work through a specific problem within their force area, and obviously use the SARA model effectively, carry out the scanning and analysis properly, which I think sometimes kind of gets brushed over a little bit when problem solving is being carried out, but also thinking about what the response could be, and then carrying out some kind of assessment at the end to see how effective the problem solving activity had been. In addition to that, each force identified a POP analyst who would be working with the POP champion to, at all phases really, but probably most importantly, that scanning and analysis phase, to make sure that that was actually carried out properly, but also the evaluation, the assessment phase, so that good quality assessment was being carried out into the effectiveness of the response that was implemented. And they received, I think, 3 two-day workshops, by and large along the same lines as the guide, which we haven't published yet, but really just introducing them to specific techniques that tend to be used for problem solving. And really, I think it became quite evident that a lot of analysts hadn't actually been exposed to these particular techniques. They weren't complicated techniques; they just didn't actually know that they existed. Sort of hot times, hot places, things like that. So they were really, really, really receptive to what they actually received, and I'd probably go as far as to say actually the problem-solving capability within the forces who received the training is probably actually far better from an analytical perspective now, because they know what the techniques are, and they've been shown how they work in terms of the various computer packages that actually exist. So yeah, that support was provided, but there was ongoing support for the Hotspots activity. We didn't just leave forces to actually, just crack on. You've got the hang of it now. You don't need our help anymore. UCL provided this kind of wraparound support in terms of providing, advice and guidance to the forces that are actually still undertaking that piece of work. And in March, we had a very, very interesting and useful sort of a wrap-up seminar that involved all the forces that were participating in the GRIP Fund, and they presented all of their POP projects to all the other analysts and GRIP Fund participants. And some of those there was one which was about a multifaceted approach to addressing knife crime, multi-agency approaches to addressing violence, robbery and antisocial behaviour, the use of e-scooters in the offences of violence and drugs, which is certainly a new one, serious violence in the nighttime economy, robbery of bikes, and also violence in or around fast food outlets. And the fast food outlet link was one that became very, very obvious in terms of some of the offences that we were seeing. So it was really quite interesting to see the outcomes of that. But it was really interesting to see how much development had taken place, certainly around the serious violence aspect, but certainly also on problem solving more generally, because obviously we were interested in promoting that for all crime types, not just serious violence. And I think this has really provided that kind of springboard to better problem solving within forces. So that was last financial year, and the bit you're probably all waiting for, what are we doing this year? I can't tell you. Unfortunately, we're still undergoing procurement, and obviously there's lots and lots of interesting and rather strict rules around what I can and can't say in terms of the support that we're going to be offering in this financial year. So it's just a shame. I almost want to say to you, come and ask me the same question next month. I might be able to give you more information. But needless to say, support will be offered. Maybe along the same lines as what's already been offered, but that's subject to the processes that we need to go through. But we are very keen to ensure that all forces are given as much support, both from a sort of a hotspots policing perspective, but also a problem solving perspective, to ensure that we actually are able to provide as much of a consistent approach as possible to ensure that everybody effectively gets a bit of everything. So we're still in the process, unfortunately, of that. And as I said, hopefully by this time next month, we'll be in a position whereby we can start to provide a little bit more detail around what that looks like.
Rob, I'm really sorry. I'm just going to jump in, just conscious of time. So
Yep.
I'll just open up for the last couple of minutes for a few questions. I was just going to say, though, so just to confirm, there probably will be some sort of support for forces and those doing hotspot policing, and those resources you spoke about around the Hotspots guide and then the upcoming problem solving, they'll also be available to areas. Is that right?
Yes, the
Brilliant.
the guides will be published on our website, so they will be available to everybody. And yes, there will be support offered, to be confirmed exactly what it looks like. So yeah,
Fantastic.
that was my penultimate slide anyway, so I was nearly
Thank
there.
you very much. Yes, so close. It was always going to be a squeeze. So we've just got a couple of minutes. What I would say is please do continue to keep the chat going in the kind of chat box, because lots of people are feeding in. There's a huge amount of experience and insight that everybody brings. So please do keep commenting. I was just going to bring in Nick just around the question of community perceptions of hotspot policing. So I know the Home Office has commissioned some work around this, but if anybody else wants to feed in, that'd be great.
Yeah, I should have had that in the next steps. Apologies. We've got two levels of things going on there. Obviously, agree it's a really important question to understand the community impacts of all of this. So work that's already happened is a number of forces got some funding to do bespoke community surveys. Those results are being pulled, and we are hoping to get those out into the public domain at some point in this financial year. And then now that the programme has moved to all forces, there will also be a national survey being carried out this year by an evaluation partner to look at those community impacts. So there should be a sort of small scale thing coming out fairly soon, and then a really big scale thing in a year or two's time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Nicola, you mentioned in terms of community perceptions being really positive. I wondered if you wanted to add anything to that in terms of what approach you've used to collect those insights.
Yeah, I was just starting to type something up. So we develop returns, and it includes those interactions. So part of our briefing, we give them key messages because we want cops out there to say the right things, and we want to improve those feelings of safety as well. So we collect the number of interactions from sort of engagements, because again, it was an issue for us being sure that officers were out there being visible and actively engaging. So that's the way we ensure that that's done, and we've had some real positive responses.
Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Charlotte.
Hi, sorry, I did pop this in the chat, and I don't really know which of you speakers will be best placed to answer this. In a previous role, I worked in a hostel-based youth violence intervention where we kind of weren't able to track kind of concretely, but we definitely saw an increase in young people presenting for police-related or police-caused injuries after periods of time where there might have been increased police presence on the street. So I just wanted to know if there'd been any kind of trends in increased and what was happening to minimise harm to young people who we know have kind of at the moment very low levels of trust in the police.
I'm not sure, Nicola or Rob?
I can come in there. Obviously, we're using predominantly neighbourhood officers now. We give them sort of some key messages to engage with the children around. And we've also used things like Fearless as well to try and encourage sort of reporting. But we just try to make sure that they're sort of engaged around things that we talk about, the consequences of knife crime, and try and start conversations rather than being sort of more sort of adversarial approach with young people, moving them on. We try and get them to engage. That's
really good to hear, and I'm sure kind of that's something that must vary region by region as well, and depend on the cohort of young people that officers will be kind of engaging with.
We do some joint patrolling as well with sort of outreach youth youth outreach workers as well, and try and sort of divert. And we have it, in terms of ESB, like most forces, sort of a staged approach to ESB, rather than sort of going into heavy-handed anyway. So yeah, we try and look towards diversion and intervention.
That's really nice to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are at time. I do know that Graham's got his hand up though. So do you want to ask your question if we can squeeze it into a quick response? If not, we will definitely endeavour to respond afterwards.
Thank you. Yes, I put my question in the chat, but I'll read it. Nick spoke about police officers wearing GPS. I've recently read Andrew Ferguson's Big Data Policing book, and he quotes a case there. I know it's Chicago in America, but 1% of police officers responsible for a third of misconduct cases. He calls this blue data. I wonder what the speakers have comments have about the role of blue data in repairing some of the mistrust many communities have, particularly young people, towards police, and the kind of broader issues of accountability.
Thank you. Nicola, Rob?
I mean, I guess it's probably worth just clarifying that on the data that is collected as part of this is that from the Home Office perspective, we don't collect anything on the individual officers. So we can't see which officer it is going into patrol, going into a hotspot area, whatever. So there's no kind of monitoring of that kind of activity, who at the officer level. It's purely to know what the presence was in general in the hotspots. So I guess we couldn't use it for the good or the bad, if that's what you're sort of getting at there.
Maybe we should do it.
Well, yeah, that's what I think. That's what I thought you were saying. Maybe. It would take us to a new level of data protection type issues, but I can see what you're saying.
I think most uniform officers wear body-worn video nationally now anyway when they're on patrol.
We know that they switch it off repeatedly. There's plenty of evidence of that. What Ferguson argues is that this kind of what he calls blue data might really be crucial in supporting police accountability, which is a thing that's lacking in the communities that many of the people in this seminar work. I'm a community worker, there's lots of community workers here, I'm sure, and we have to deal with this kind of narrative from young people, especially about the fact that they mistrust the police.
Thank you very much, Graham. Unfortunately, due to time, I am going to have to call it as a close there. What I do want to say is a huge thank you to everyone kind of joining us this afternoon and contributing to the discussion. Thank you so much for our speakers in terms of sharing their insights today. Just to add, we've added a feedback form within the chat, so please do spend a couple of minutes providing feedback. That would be really great. The other thing I would encourage you to do is to visit our website. We have a new dedicated space for policing, so you'll be able to see all of the links to police related toolkit entries. You'll also be able to find out about any of our resources, outputs, as well as the suite of upcoming virtual learning cafes that we have. So I'll leave it there, but thank you so much. And please do get in touch with us if you've got any suggestions about what YEF could be doing more within the space of hotspot policing or policing more broadly. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.